Well, welcome everyone to another Nexus webinar. I'm your host, Andrew Estes, and today I've been really looking forward and so excited to introduce you guys to Joshua Brown, aka the pressure washing pastor. Joshua is a pastor turned entrepreneur, passionate about equipping ministry leaders with sustainable tent making pathways. And after 22 years in vocational ministry, he launched Brown's Pressure Washing in the Nashville area, growing it to a multi-million dollar business that creates jobs and serves as a disciple making platform. He also started pressurewashingpastor.com, which is a great ministry coaching kingdom minded entrepreneurs and church planters to launch businesses that provide financial stability for gospel impact. Uh, he is helping leaders integrate faith and business more readily to advance the Great Commission as they mobilize ministers into the marketplace. So Joshua, thank you so much for your time today, man. So excited to get to know you more.
Brother, I'm honored, I'm pumped, and I'm hoping to add your listeners a ton of value today. So please ask away, and I'll expose everything that I know to help anybody that I can.
Awesome, man. Well, let's just kick it off. I'd love to just to introduce you a little bit better. Would you just kind of walk us through? I know there's a lot that has happened in your story. I really enjoyed, just kind of getting ready for this interview yesterday and just watching through some of your story and just seeing what God has really done in your life. Would you just kind of give us a broad overview of just the path to what has led you to today?
Yeah, just to sum it up, um, former drug dealer, pothead, high school dropout. My biological father offered to pay for my abortion and not be in my life, and my mom was 15 years old. And you don't realize how much trauma that causes over the years until you get old and you start looking back, and then you're aware this explains a whole lot of my behaviors. And by the time I'm 20, I get in a bad car wreck, and God just starts speaking to me through a Tupac Shakur song. It's about a heaven for a G. I'm sure
Let's go.
none of your listeners know anything about, some hip hop, but that was my world. They were my mentors. And while listening to that song after my car wreck, I felt like the Lord just said, if you would have died, he's speaking, but not like an audible voice, but he's speaking. And it's like, if you would have died in that car wreck, your life would have made an impact on no one. And inside of Heaven for a G, they're talking about tipping their cups for those, that have passed away, or, smoking a blunt. And it's like, is that the culmination of my life, my existence? And that drove me to the last night of a Wesleyan revival service in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Revival services for our micro church planners and our folks have not been in it. It's like a week long experience that you invite people that are far from God to come to know God. So I was that person, and while sitting there with my girlfriend, had weed with me. I didn't have intentions to give my life to the Lord that night, but I just felt like the Lord said, Joshua, I love you. And it meant everything. For a dude without a dad, hearing that you're loved and wanted meant everything. And so I went forward, gave the pastor my pot, God my heart, September 27th, 1997. And so back in those days, maybe still now, if you have a radical conversion the next week, you're teaching Sunday school class, become the youth pastor. You're moving forward from there. So that's kind of my story of getting into ministry, 22 years, married for 28 years, six kids, 23 down to three, and we can start where you want to start from there.
Wow, man, that's awesome. Yeah, no, I was just blown away by just kind of watching through, just some of your story and just hearing everything that just God's led you through and just the tensions and the struggles as a leader that you've had to kind of face with the identity crisis and different things like that. Yeah, there's so many different places we could go, but why don't you walk us through maybe just your initial call into ministry coming out of that?
Well, I'll share my experience. It may not be everyone's experience, but somewhat I wonder if it is everyone's experience. The call was after giving the pastor my pot and God my heart, I showed up the next week, because I'm working at Papa John's and, got side hustles. And so I got time during the day, and I show up at the pastor's office and I said, okay, what's next? I got rid of all my CDs, got rid of my 410s, my four mids, my Alpine, the thug life, I was repenting from it. And I said, what do I need to know? What do I need to do? And he was like, what do you mean? I said, well, I need to know what I'm supposed to now do. Like, how do I live a righteous life? And they hooked me up with a few dudes, and I would say they did their best, but formal discipleship or, hey, walk with me and I'll walk with you was not really the opportunity. And so what they ultimately determined is you must have a call on your life for ministry. And so I ended up in Bible school, John Wesley College, High Point, North Carolina, and that kind of entered into, from there, met some great human beings and started working at a Quaker church in Yadkinville, North Carolina, and then planted a church and worked at some Wesleyans and Nazarene churches and over the course of that 22 years. And so I had a great experience, but looking back on it now, and I look at it from a 47, soon to be 48-year-old, and I'm like, man, I really just wanted to know what it meant to be a disciple of King Jesus so I could make disciples. And I ended up getting into church growth movement. And so the next thing you know, I'm creating the operating system that was passed on at whatever moment or whatever church or whatever culture was passed on to it. Now that I'm far from it, I now realize, okay, there's people that have written books and curriculum and leaders and have influenced the Western mind as it relates to the mission of of his church, and it has become more church planting focused in my experience, and then grow your church versus disciple making. Um, and that is where the rub came in and why I ended up Googling top 5 businesses I can open for $5,000 or less, because who hires a former pastor when he's starting to wonder, what am I going to do if I'm no longer in here? Because I want you to, for those that are listening, I want you to remember radical salvation. It was, what must I do to glorify this God who loves me for the rest of my life? And I knew it was discipleship. I know it's becoming a disciple so I can be a disciple wherever I am. But when I look back over the 22 years, most of my life was growing programs and events to retain people to serve inside the local ecclesia so it could get bigger. And I just struggle for my narrative. I struggle seeing the metrics of what discipleship looks like inside the local church. And so when we get into the conversation of what does discipleship look like at Brown's Pressure Washing, a great place to start is, what does discipleship look like in your church? And then let's measure the key performance indicators on which one of them has the most amount of opportunity to saturate and influence someone's life for the king and the kingdom, if that makes any sense at all.
Yeah, that's fantastic, man. Tell me a little bit about that shift in you. I mean, so you find yourself in this full-on church growth movement. At what point, or maybe was it a message you listened to, a book you read, or somebody you met? Like, what was the transition for you that just made a hardline shift back towards like real disciple making?
So it's not, I didn't read a book and all of a sudden I'm like, okay, this is the way. It was many books, so everything from Francis Chan's We Are Church to a bunch of different influencers, mission, community on mission, all these different books were coming out and becoming popular. But for me, what was going on internally is I felt like I had no control over my future. It seemed like I was dating a new congregation to see if they would love me and accept me when I'm no longer at the former church I was. And so 22 years is 7 different churches, and I'm all in at all those churches. It wasn't stepping stones to get to the next stage. It was, okay, this is where God has called me and this is where I'm at. And I think from looking at my wife saying, hey, I'm kind of tired of moving all the time, and I'm tired of marrying a group of people and then the pastor leaves, which are all beautiful parts of church, the local church. There's lots of beauty inside of it. But for me, burnout, feeling like I'm being used to grow a local ecclesia rather than, and when I use the word ecclesia, a church model, question mark, versus really being able to say, man, we are killing it inside of disciple making. And what I also learned while reading a bunch of discipleship books is all the discipleship books I saw said that it took time to make disciples, life on a life. You know, there was a book called, I think it's Jim Putnam, it's Real Life Discipleship. And everything showed that you spend time with those that you're discipling. And so you look at your local pastor or your local staff member, how much time are they getting with people that are working 40 hours a week and coming in on a Sunday morning and maybe a Wednesday night? I didn't get a ton of time. And so all of this stuff was coming to culmination of saying there's got to be another way to provide. So I was really giving up. I did not have the frameworks I have today as far as this tent making pathway, minister in the marketplace, business as mission. I knew nothing. A pest, I had no clue. I was not trained inside of that framework. And so in many ways, I thought I left ministry, vocational ministry, but I was moving towards something that gave me so much opportunity inside of the city to turn up, a lunch and learn. Lunch and learn is when you can go to a real estate office and for some bagels and some orange juice and coffee, they let you share about your business. And I would turn that into my pulpit or into an opportunity to say, hey, I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do, but before I share what, I'm going to share why. And I just share my testimony. And so every opportunity I got, I just started sharing the gospel. And in Acts 1:8, he says, you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit comes upon you, and you shall be my, come on, Andrew, you know it,
Witnesses.
our witnesses. And why are we not training everybody to say, wherever you are, we have this testimony that lives and breathes within us, and we just need to be sharing it everywhere we go. And so that's the beauty of what I discovered. And then the team that we ended up hiring, those become your disciples because you're working alongside them all the day, all the time. And I'm going way too fast for the conversation, but I'm saying all of a sudden I got time with people. As a youth pastor, I would call the kids on Thursday morning and be like, "Hey, where were you Wednesday night? I didn't get no time with you. You were at soccer. How you doing that?" Like I cared more about whether or not they were in my service versus if they were making impact inside of their community. So instead of empowering kids to go be and make disciples at soccer practice on Wednesday nights, my mindset was completely different. It was like, hey, you got to be here because I was taught to retain in order to train, in order to send our people on mission, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, no, that's good, man. Tell me about the moment when you're just like, I need to make a shift, like getting out of ministry and like starting a business, like not just like how you got into pressure washing, but just like the moment that really led you to like Googling like how do you start a business for 5 grand, like that type of stuff. Like what led to that moment of like I'm officially done at this point.
So, do you believe that God can work through good people
I believe so. Yes.
and God works through bad people? And sometimes there's good people doing good things, but God is actually doing the opposite thing inside of you. And so I love the lead pastor that I had, but I had if you're familiar with New Thing and the guys over at KC Underground.
Yeah.
They've created, there's a book that they wrote, and I'm sure your listeners are familiar with it, but inside of it talks about spider bites. And so I think I had enough spider bites from other leadership pastors that ended up creating the last spider bite where it was like, there's no more, no more. And so it's so trivial. If I even tell you the story, you're going to think it's ridiculous. But the story that led everything, I mean, it's so small, but like even small things can break you if you've already experienced a lot of brokenness. From burying a friends to being hired to plant church to the pastor going over here after hiring me, like there's a lot of transition inside of ministry. The small little story that changed everything is on a Sunday morning, I would do these things called community experiences with our youth ministry, where I would take our teens and I would either take them somewhere to experience something in the community or I would have a leader come in. I'm going to speed it up because I might lose people here, but I basically took them to a driving under the influence event where they get trained on don't drink and drive. I thought it was a big enough issue as teen, only high schoolers
Yeah.
that were at the drive. And so they get behind a wheel. It's all free. There's only certain windows you can go. And when I took them, the lead pastor got heat from a board member that, hey, your youth pastor is taking people out on Sunday morning. I had someone leading Sunday school that morning. I had all my stuff covered, but I took a group and I thought I had permission to go do this. And I'm trying to do good and getting heat and just saying, hey, what are you doing? You can't be doing that, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, all right, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. And so it was a little bit of like, no, I'm not going to take it, and that's what propelled to say I'm going to control the future of our family.
Yeah, good man. Well, let's shift and move into like just the launching of Brown's pressure washing, man. Tell me walking through that story of you get to the point where you're just done with, some of the nastiness of ministry and getting into like I'm going to start my own business. For what purpose would be one question, but then how did you kind of get into it?
So I'd love to unpack mission, vision, values, and goals in the future of this conversation.
Yeah.
But the original purpose is how can I provide my family if I'm no longer dependent upon the church? That
Mm.
that is the key motivator is I mean, Papa John's and Uber was my plan, It is like, okay, I'm going to put in 70 hours a week working because I'm like, I'm pretty sure I feel like in good conscience, I'm burnt out. And I don't really think what I'm doing is doing what kingdom impact that I really felt I said yes to when I was, 20 years old. And, when you think of calling, it's like we're called to be like Jesus and to make him known wherever we are. So um, I was ultimately my why was just to provide for my family. And so I went and worked with a friend of mine who is also a former pastor who started a side hustle. And I just wanted to figure out if I could make a living off this. And so he let me work with him for like 4 hours, out of High Point, North Carolina. And what I saw was that he made more legal money than I had ever seen. It was $800 in 4 hours. And I was like, bro, you're rich. Yeah, I was like, and all you did was shoot some soap on some stuff, let it dwell, and then clean it off with a hose, a wand. And I'm like, right. So if I showed you my report card, GPA, I'm a high school dropout. Like, but I was like, I can do this. And that's when I built a small little trailer, took out some loans, and started playing with it here in Nashville. And after year one, we did 225,000 while I was full time on staff. Then we did 443 full time still on staff. Year three, 700 and something, 900 something, year four. And that's when I was like, okay, I think I can provide for my family outside of ministry. And I believed I walked away from being a pastor. And so
So you
this
you were
pressure
still full
washing,
time on staff at the church doing this.
full time. Yeah, I mean, from campus ministry to first impressions to connections to student ministries, I had multiple roles at a church of about 550. And my leadership on DISC is high influencer. And so I like to do work through others. And then I
Yeah.
cast a lot of vision. And so with those skills, I was able to, cast vision for others and then send them off to go do work. And I figured it out as we went, and I had incredible people that came along the journey to make this thing happen.
Wow, that's amazing, man. So for the first like 4 years, you're still full time at the church. How big was your team that you were leading at that point?
When we say team, I had like 100 something volunteers at the church I was
No, I
responsible
mean, yeah, the
for.
the business side of things.
On the business side, it was way too big. And so when I give you a number, you're gonna be like, man, that's impressive. And I had a guy with money that wanted to perhaps invest or purchase Browns in year four. And when they said that, hey, I stuck my chest out and I was like, yeah, we got like 20 team members in the company. We're doing like 1.2 in year four and a half or something. And he's like, well,
Wow.
that's interesting. He said, we do the same thing in a Seattle location, and they use 5 team members. And that's when I learned that I didn't know a lot of this because I would be doing a lot of work with a lot of part-timers. And because I was using college kids and high school kids and anybody in the community that needed a job, we would train them and just send them off. And so the today, our if we're 15 to 20, we're happy. That's around where our team members are, and we'll hit 10 million total revenue this year since we've
Wow.
started the business. And and so our goal is to run about 15 to 20, depending on the season. And we're also set up like a corporation where we also have marketing and sales directors and operations and so forth. So there's also out of the field positions as well.
Yeah, for sure, man. So tell me, when you were full time in ministry, just kind of doing this on the side, what does a typical week kind of look like for you in that season?
Well, let me tell you the first time I ever experienced my first job. So remember I had 22 years of ministry experience, and every event, fall festival, you name it. After we got done with it on Sunday, on Monday during staff, we talk about what's next and how to follow up with those and get them plugged in, and then let's make it bigger and better the last time. And I never felt what I felt after pressure washing my first house. I cleaned this house and it looked beautiful, soft washed it, went to the door, said, Mrs. Jones, we're done with your house. And she said, oh, it looks so pretty. Here's, I'm going to say $300. Thank you so much. Have a good day. Oh, Mrs. Jones, by the way, it means a lot to our small little company if you give us a 5-star review. Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. And then I went to the car and I sat there. I'm like, I'm done. I never felt I can't recall a time in ministry where I ever felt like I've got completed a job. I can't tell you a time. It was always never ending. And so I had money, I had someone that was thankful, and I served somebody and I was done. And then I could go serve somebody else. And so it was like short term serving, praying, loving people. And then you get to empower and train other people to do that and send them off to represent you. And if you represents Christ, to represent Christ in the community. And so I'd never felt that ever. And so if you want to re-ask the question that you asked, I wanted to share with you my first time experience.
Yeah, no, that's awesome, man. So tell me, you're doing this on the side as you're just getting started.
Yeah.
What did a typical week look like for you? Were you pressure washing in the afternoons or on Saturdays, or what did that look like in relation to what you were doing with church?
So in Strength Finders, um, my number one strength is restorative. So it's solving problems. So I could not answer the phones and work at the church at the same time. So the first thing I needed to do is find someone who could grab the phones. And so I paid my sister $5, and this is 2016 and 17, $5 for every estimate that she wrote. And so she could work at home. She answers it. Thanks for calling Brown's Pressure Washing. This is Ashley. How can I help you? She puts the info inside of a CRM, and that's $5 for her. And all she has to have is grab a phone. So we started there. I would follow up when I had a chance. And I would say, hey, Mrs. Jones, I got a phone call. I heard you need an estimate. And I'd show up on site on my days off, or I would use a block schedule for my work hours. And so a block schedule is 4-hour blocks. And so you have 12 hours in a day. And if two of those blocks belong to the church, one of those blocks belong to me. And so I would also shift around some of my meetings and times so I could be more strategical in being able to get some estimates done. And so 1 or 2 blocks a week, I would utilize that for selling. And then on Friday or Saturday, I would pressure wash. And before I made the decision to open up the business, I looked at the person that I was working out with one morning and I said, I think I'm going to have to stop working out. He said, why? I said, I'm going to start a business. He said, well, why do you have to stop stop working out? I was like, because I got to give up things in order to put things in. And the lingo or the quote is, in order to go up, you have to give up. And so I had to look at my schedule and say, what do I have to give up? and I had to start playing maybe less video games, or I had to stay up after putting the kids to bed. During this time, full on discipleship. So just know as far as family discipleship, Vadi Bakum, family worship nights, catechisms. And so I wasn't neglecting my roles as being a husband and father. I just found other slots to give up some things in my life to include these things. And so working on websites and CRMs and emails and understanding how do I get someone to click and multiple calls to action on a website and like all of that stuff are things that I did in my spare time.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, tell me, since making that transition into like full-time business with Browns, what has ministry and what does discipleship actually look like for you? Whether it's with your team in particular, or more so probably outside of that. What does that look like with the people that you're engaging with in your community?
So let me share with you what discipleship has looked like. And this question is a great question to be asked both ways as it relates to those who are on staff at a church and those who are on staff in a business. And if we had a key performance indicator and say, okay, what are the key indicators that someone is spending time with Jesus or becoming like Jesus, or what word I would use is witnessing. And so you almost have to funnel that down to simple indicators of this is what discipleship looks like. So, number one is you have to be what you want to reproduce in others. And so, Hal Perkins, this beautiful book, says you teach what you know, but you reproduce who you are. And so, the number one thing that we've got to start with and is really ourselves. When you look at what is the biggest problem in the world, it's the person that is in the mirror. It's us. And if we're willing to start by spending time with Christ in His Word, in prayer, in confession, then we're able to reproduce ourselves inside of those that we spend the most time with. And so early on, every morning, 4 a.m., I'd be reading, studying, praying, and I would use the 4 R's. It was read, record, reflect, respond. Have you heard of that framework
Hmm.
of? And whatever I was doing when the team showed up that morning, I would speak out of my private time with the Lord and just say, "Hey, there's a passage of scripture that the Lord was speaking to me on." So this would be the beginning of our check-ins. I just share God's word. And then I'd say, "Okay, and by the way, guys, here's your schedule for today," and that's send them out. What's interesting, the more time you spend with someone, the more they take on your characteristics. I've got a team member named Brady, and he uses the word wowzer all the time. And I'm like catching myself going, wowzer. And I'm like, man, what in the world? Why in the world am I like Brady? And it's all because we become like those that we spend time with. And so the number one thing that allows you to do is to spend time with those that are on your team. Then your team members start behaving like you would. Let me give you a few examples. I had a team member named Caleb. He called me up and said, Josh, there's a girl that I'm friends with at school, and she told me that she's going to be driving out of state to have an abortion. What should I do? I was like, Caleb, like, Caleb, you got to do everything you got to do. She said she didn't want me to tell the parents. I was like, Caleb, you got to do whatever you got to do. End up calling the parents while she's in the car to have the abortion that's scheduled out of state. He calls and says, oh, he calls the parents, tells the whole situation. The parents calls her. She comes back. The baby's like 3 years old now. And when we talk about the difference that we can make inside of the life, it's reproducing Christ inside of the lives of others. And then they come to us asking advice or thoughts or, what counsel for different issues. Another one is Josiah. This is probably about 3.5, 4 years ago. He's one of our team members, and he's washing a house. And before he started washing the house, he walked up to the lady that owned the home and said, "Hey, Mrs. Jones, I have on here that we're washing your house today. And by the way, I noticed that you've got a wooden ramp leading up to your front porch, and it's kind of green. Would you be okay if we would just clean this? Because we understand it's probably slippery." She said, "Oh no, we don't need you to touch it." my husband passed away. So he starts washing the house, and as the house is being washed, he has his raincoat on, has a little hat on, has his hoodie on top, and rain starts coming down. And he starts thinking, give the house wash away for free. That's what he says he hears. He's like, well, what would Josh think? Oh, he won't care. It's okay. When your team starts thinking and doing what you would think and what you would do, that is the reproduction of making disciples. He goes forward to the front door, knocks on it after it's all said and done, and says, Mrs. Jones, we're done with your house. She said, okay, great. Let me grab the money. Grab the money. Literally like a story in a storybook. Hands wadded bills and change to pay for this house wash. And Josiah says, no, this one's on us. She starts crying. He starts crying. And from there, it gave birth to what we know today as washing widows' houses in Nashville for free. So one of our key metrics is how many widows' homes can we wash a year? This is a way of saying, hey, you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and the uttermost parts of the world. It's like, let's talk about what it looks like. So I'm not begging people for donations. We're providing work for people where they can provide for their families. We have what's called leadership development. It's the best staff meeting you've ever been at in your entire lives. We're not praying over hip replacements. We're not talking about knee replacements and going and visiting people. We're talking about leadership development. And basically, what would Jesus do if he owned our business? What would it look like if we washed and witnessed? What would it look like if we created a metrics of, hey, did you get to pray for anybody today? If so, we want to celebrate it. And what we learn is that what we celebrate, we get more of. All of that is inside of this ministry conversation in the marketplace. I'll share one more story. This past weekend, we are hosting an open interview, and we've invited everyone to come that's looking for a job in Nashville. And my tagline on all of our posts, you can see it on our Facebook or on our website, now hiring local missionaries, make an impact while making an income. So the language of who we're trying to attract are people that are like, already the funnel is there. And then our customers know. And so we ended up having some folks show up to the open interview. And while we're in, man, I've got so many stories. I've got so many stories. We could go on for a long time. During this time, we started out by saying, hey, we're really thankful that you're here today. This is kind of what's going to happen. I'm going to share a little bit about myself and how I got connected to Browns. And then our sales manager is going to share. And then our operations manager is going to share. And for the next 30 minutes, we're sharing our testimonies with folks who show up to an open interview. What kind of business leads with God saved me? I used to be an addict, so I got to listen to Josh Lee, Brady Writings, myself. We shared with team members or potential employees the gospel. And the more we share our testimony, the better that we get at it. And the goal that I have is that every single one of our team members would start getting courage to work through their story, to share their story so they could be his witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, and the uttermost parts of the world. And then also celebrating if the Lord opens up doors for praying for individuals. And man, there's so many stories with the widow washes, because once you start doing this and they don't know you're doing it, we have a salesman that's been called out there, finds out that she's a widow, and then you tell her, hey, we're going to give the house wash away. They literally sit back on their porch and they start crying and say, why are you guys so kind? And then it gives you the opportunity to share the gospel and to be his witnesses in the community that you're in through a business. I don't know why not everybody is saying, hey, let's start a business that makes an impact while making an income.
Yeah, dude, that's fantastic. I love those stories. Tell me Tell me how that has, so I mean, there's an obvious influence of the way that you've led, the way that you are kind of presenting yourself, the way you act, the way you lived, and influencing those that you're leading. How are you seeing them? start to influence others, or maybe in a discipleship context, as you are leading other people, like how are you seeing them now lead others? Maybe it's within the business, within like lower subordinates, like in the team or something like that, or within their own influence in their own communities.
Well, let me answer that in two ways, and then also correct any frameworks that I think don't align with our culture. When we utilize the word subordinates, we consider ourselves not so with us. The greatest among you shall be your servant. So I literally had a EOS meeting yesterday where we revealed the org chart, and guess where I was on the org chart? The very top or the very bottom?
Is it an upside down org chart or is it?
An upside down org chart. And
That's
so
good.
I believe the kingdom is upside down. So our org chart is upside down.
Wow.
And the people that are the greatest in our business are at the very top, and they're our clean team, they're our sales team, they're our office admins. Those are the people that are spending the most amount of time with our customers. And so, how do we serve them and empower them to lead? And so, know that everything starts with a culture. And so, creating and cultivating and protecting and making sure that we're hiring humble, honest, hardworking teams and developing leaders where we say there's no greater leader on the planet that showed humility than Jesus. So, let's talk about how he was a servant leader. And so, all of our conversations are around that type of core value conversations. Um, Say that one question again because I just got off track because I hit that subordinate part. Ask that
No,
question.
yeah, that was a red button word for you. I apologize for that,
It's a
but
red button.
the that's just kind of like the multiplying of disciples. Like how are you kind of seeing that? So the team that you're leading and training and sharing your word with, like moving forward from that, how are you seeing that grow?
So the most recent that I can celebrate, and we don't want to talk about things that we did 10 years ago. We want to talk about what we did last week. And the greatest thing that we've seen by far is our sales manager, he and I. So let me back up a little bit. For me, the best Bible app on the planet to do devotions with is Through the Word. I don't know if you know Chris Langham and his team, and Through the Word, it is brilliantly done where you get chapter by chapter, verse by verse. You get 10 minutes of theological work. Peyton Jones is one of the guys that's on there, and they have a handful of other guys. And so you spend 10 minutes in there, and then you spend your time in the Word, and then you end up recording a 3 minute, up to 3 minute message for up to 12 guys that you've invited into this discipleship time, into this Bible study time. And first, I did it for about a year with one of our team members. He had never had 1 year or 3 months consistently every day in the Word. If we said to our entire audience base and listeners that, hey, would your life level up if you spent every single day in the Word and create a rhythm and a routine? I mean, it goes through the roof as far as like you're on fire, your intention, your development, your discipleship, Romans 12:1 and 2, like all of that happens as we spend time in the Word. So I spent about a year with him going through multiple books of the Bible. And then we invited a few other guys inside of the Bible app Through the Word. Then we all are on it. And now I'm no longer with them. I'm doing this shred where you're supposed to go through the entire word in 30 days. Very difficult. Um, and he is now the leader of this group and has two guys that he spends every single day with in developing a rhythm and a routine of discipleship inside the company, with
Wow.
the goal being that they end up inviting one or two guys in the company to be going through the word. And so because it's audible or you can read it, it's just a very fantastic way of getting your entire team to become leaders in developing it. And Brady told me the other day, I've never been so on fire and dialed in my relationship with God. That's relevant. If we looked around
Yeah.
our staff members at a church and say, is my life making their life better? And they're on fire for Jesus and they are now spending time with him and with others. I think that's a model for success. I think that's a model.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, I really love to spend the rest of our time really kind of double clicking on just the way in which that you are multiplying your business right now. And I know that one of the biggest heartbeats that you have is now like training church planters to be able to go and do this type of work, but also start a Brown's pressure washing business like wherever they go. And would love to just kind of hear you unpack a little bit of that, like how you're training people through this what you call a tent making process, right? And going through that. But then if you could just, walk us through, even a couple of stories, would love to kind of do that. But just walk us through, and this would be a great opportunity for you just to even share just mission, vision, values of maybe even your organization and what you're looking at doing and multiplying the kingdom through, just being a ministry in the marketplace, right? So as you're walking through some of this stuff, how maybe very briefly, like what led to the tent making training to
Okay.
multiplying your business, but then like how does somebody get connected with that, and how does that influence where they're going?
So I'm huge on setting the proper expectations. And so in the major league, being a batter, what's a good average for a batter?
300,
And so
3 out of 10.
so 7 out of the 10 are fails.
Yeah, yeah. I
Okay.
love like even in like tennis, I want to say I forget who talks about tennis, but like they fail almost on every other point, and it's just like if you can just get just above 50%, then you're successful in tennis.
Yep. And so let's also think about other industries, other inventors. Think about the people that we know that have created like amazing inventions. There were thousands of inventions and ideas that did not work. And so just to set the expectation up properly, we're 3 years in to this thing that I ultimately was on my knees in my garage in the morning and said, God, what do you want me to do next with my life? And I felt like he said, call ministers into the marketplace. I didn't know what that meant. There was no pressure washing pastor then. I didn't even want to use the word pressure washing pastor because I felt it was marketing the word pastor. But as I pressed in, and let me just share that for 1 second, just to make sure that I give the pathos properly to those that are listening. I did not pursue to be a pressure washing pastor. I was at a the largest gathering of seven-figure home service businesses in the country. They meet at the Standard in Nashville. And while there, one of the guys around a table, you meet every 3 months, maybe about 6, 9 months in, he says, there goes the pressure washing pastor. I dunked my head down and I felt shame because I was thinking, why does he think I'm a pastor? I'm not on staff anywhere. I'm no longer on staff. And that's where I learned that who you are is who you are wherever you are. And so even the term pressure washing pastor had to be confirmed by God because I didn't want to make it a marketing tool. And that's why we use the word Brown's pressure washing versus open up a pressure washing pastor near you, if that makes sense. I don't want to market or create expectations. I want to create anticipation for great experiences inside the marketplace. So my first two, after responding to where I felt like God said, "Hey, call ministers in the marketplace," were beta test. I beta test two different locations, one in Mississippi, one in Florida, with friends that I knew, and just said, "Hey, would you be interested in trying this thing? I need to know what we need, what they need to know, and what kind of support they need." And so those first two, we went for months or up to a year, and we learned what we have to give in order to create this thing in the future. From there, I ended up creating voted the most interesting booth at Exponential called the Pressure Washing Pastor booth. And people would walk by and say, they just stare at it because they didn't get the concept of ministry in the marketplace just makes sense. They were like, you don't have curriculum to sell? You don't have a stage and lights or, a Bible, and it's like, no, this is a model for ministry in the marketplace. I've got a blueprint. And I had a few people that ended up following up with. And we opened one up in Houston, opened up one in Chattanooga, we sent one of our guys down to Birmingham because he married a lady from there, and then we've opened up one in Louisville. And so the ones that we, and then I've got a couple that are about to go green now in Portland and Spokane. And so all of this has been a slow grow and a slow learn. And when we bring people on, we just say, hey, we're learning as we go what's required in different cities and so forth. And so when we cast a vision, I don't want anyone to think that it's easy and you just buy a license and you get video courses and boot camps and KPI training and coaching and then we branding and SOPs. Like, yes, but it still requires work. And what I've learned is that if somebody is doing it because they're trying to provide for their family, they're willing to do the work. If there is a church that is supporting their economics, their ability and desire to go work goes way down. And so any of our listeners that thinks of, man, I'm interested in opening up a tent making pathway, the thing that you have to ask the question on is, do you want to work? Because without lead generation, without spending money on, either Google ads or PPCs or Facebook ads, you're not going to grow. And so just know that if you're wanting to create jobs, make disciples, and serve the city, and you're all in, we've got a game plan. If you don't, it's very challenging to grow something if you're not willing to put in the work that's required to grow something. I just shared a second or two. You have any clarifying questions on that?
Yeah, I think I mean so as you're kind of growing, as you're kind of learning, as you're training some of these guys, is it specifically just for guys and maybe like from your story, like where you wanted to get out of prevailing model ministry and get into like I just want to provide for my family and love people, or is there do you have any stories of people that want to like actually start churches and plant churches being bivocational with a business on the side and then also being a more traditional type of a pastor or a disciple making pastor?
We have church planting organizations that are interesting and interested in sniffing and visiting this year and also last year. Let me just share a little bit of like behind the scenes.
Yeah.
The economics that's given for church planting is very hard in an organizational structure to give permission for business planning for the purpose of micro church planting. And so that is the rub. And until the frameworks change through this language of mobilizing marketplace ministers, it's going to be difficult to release the funds. And so when we talk about church planting, most people jump into a church planting conversation because they see themselves leading a congregation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but they're leading their congregation and they're giving to support their livelihood. That model has a certain, what do they call it? When the assessments that are connected to it, and there's money that's connected to it. Well, the money that was given is for planting churches. So utilizing a tent making pathway becomes problematic if there's a large organization that has to work through this idea of how does this fit into our church planting model? That's the rub. Today, it's challenging. 100%, I believe with all my heart, 2, 3, 4 years from now, what we're talking about mobilization is common language. There's going to be funds allocated inside of every church planting organization to say, hey, we can't continue to support our church planners and do church the way that, Saddleback did church or, whatever growth movement we want
Right.
to, which did beautiful ministry. But that time has changed and we live in a new day. And so most of those who come on board, I'm more concerned about this. Do you want to create jobs? Do you want to make disciples? Do you want to serve your city? If so, let's open up a Browns. Can you open up a micro church? 100%. If you have a team that's behind you and you've got an organization that's willing to help fund the church planning side, as I help with the starting a business side, which lends us into a tent making pathway, which is what we're arguing for, is to say, hey, why don't we start having conversations about starting a business, planting a church, and making disciples in the marketplace. And that is the language we're using today. And we're inviting anybody that's listening today into that conversation.
Yeah, it's super fascinating. Just even over the last, well, I don't even know how long, because whenever we used to think of like being a bivocational or co-vocational pastor, you used to be like the black sheep in ministry. Like, well, you're only bivocational because you have to be because your church isn't big enough to support you financially, and getting to that point. And now we're engaging with so many more church planters. I mean, a dozen of them or more in our network that are some of them are bivocational and their goal is to maybe go more full time with the church at some point when it grows. But then there's some where it's just, no, I feel called to this level of ministry of whether it's school teaching or coaching or whatever that might be. And also I'm the lead pastor of a church part-time. And so I'm thinking like it would be extremely difficult, I think, to go launch a business and go launch a church at the exact same time. Not that it would be impossible, but I'm almost even thinking of like even like support staff to where even if you had like funds for a lead pastor, even if you had like support staff like going in and just saying like, hey, my worship leader, my children's pastor, my whatever is like starting a Browns business, but then also working part time with the church doing XYZ. I'm just kind of curious as part of getting to the point of launching a prevailing model church, ever part of the dream for like a pastor or a church planter right now that's utilizing your tent making pathway to be part time at both?
So this is my thought inside of this conversation is that I was spending time in the Word, and when I went through the story of Jesus seeing that there's large crowds, and they're saying, "Hey, we need to feed them, send them away." There was a boy with some loaves of bread and some fish, and I honestly believe that God's put me in the position to say, "Hey, I've got some bread, I got some fish. Willing to offer it for you to do what you will with it." And so I don't see myself as the individual that's teaching how to plant a church, how to start a business simultaneously. Now I've connected with New Breed Training for that model. So if there's a listener that wants to plant a church through New Breed, you can plant a church and start this business inside of the same conversation. But really, I believe that there's going to be other organizations that say, "Hey, I want to try this. I want to pretend with it." And so the language in which I'm using is I foresee it happening, but I'm currently just the guy that says, "Hey, I've got a blueprint here. I'm willing to offer it. Let's see whether or not we can multiply it and truly mobilize marketplace ministers inside of your city." And so that is the posture in which I'm coming into this conversation.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, man. Well, super interesting stuff. Super excited about this. And one of the things that you guys walk through is to do like even somebody that's interested in this is to do like a market analysis of just saying like at whatever part in the country, whatever city then you're in, like is there some of that? So can you just give us a brief insight into what that looks like?
Yeah, so I started thinking through, and on this side, there's this huge map on the wall of the U.S. And I had someone contact me and say, "Hey, I'm interested in open up a pressure washing business. I want to be a Browns." I'm like, "Awesome. Where do you live?" And they named what city and state. I'm like, "Where's that at?" And I'm like, I think we need to order a market analysis." He was like, "Great, let's do it." And then I had to figure out, okay, how do I order a market analysis? So I had to create the solve, and church orgs do this all the time, but I had to create an avatar. What do they spend? What do they do? What's the extra? Where do they live? And so we created a market analysis that teaches where all the bucks are. If you're a hunter, where are all the bucks inside of your forest or your woods? Or if you like fishing, where's the fishing holes inside of your lake? Now, with our market analysis, we can with confidence say, you have no fish in your lake that represent Brown's avatars. Or we can say, "Bro, you've got 25 million fish or bucks, and we know where they're all living. Let's open up a business right there, and let's use our SEOs, let's use our time, let's use business networking groups in that fishing hole, because we're going to waste our time in this tree stand over here because you're just going to see a tiny little doe walk by once a year. and we're not going to shoot that deer. And so we have basically created a way of targeting. And so if someone wants to open up a business, we got to verify that you're the right who. So we also have a tent making and assessment through New Breed, where we make sure that you have the skills necessary or your team has the skills necessary. And then if you pass the assessment and the market analysis, you come in for a boot camp where you end up getting a week-long training of church planting and starting a business training where you get field operations and marketing and sales and leadership conversation vision and all that good stuff.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And that's in partnership with Peyton Jones and New Breed, is that what you said?
Yes, sir. The tent making portion is if you're just wanting to learn how to start a business, go to
Yeah.
pressurewashingpastor.com. If you're wanting to talk about tent making, where it's planning a church for the purpose of, or starting a business for the purpose of planning a church, that's their New Breed in planning because they are the experts. And I know how to plan a business now. They know how to plant micro churches and large churches.
Yeah. Yeah. That's super fascinating, man. Um, Well, yeah, I'm super grateful for this conversation and just an opportunity to dig a little bit deeper. I'd heard your story on Josh Howard's podcast, the Sent Ones podcast, and Josh has been a good friend of Nexus and done a lot of training for us even recently. And just was really curious about all this stuff, man. So you have a ton of training, a ton of opportunities. Pressurewashingpastor.com. I watched a video just this week on Upflip, which was a YouTube video where they just did a remarkable job of like an hour long video of just like your story and your business and walking through like what it actually looks like. So just really want to encourage our guys, if you're curious more to learn about Josh and his ministry, or Joshua. Sorry, is it Joshua or Josh? You go by.
Both of them work, but once I moved back to Nashville, I just said, I'm going to start over as Joshua.
Yeah, so that's it's such a fascinating business and such an awesome ministry model, man. So yeah, anything more on just like the mission, the purpose, the vision, values of your organization that you can kind of leave us with as to why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, two things. If this podcast has any value whatsoever, please share it with some friends. If we're going to mobilize marketplace ministers, we've got to get the word out. And so if we don't do it, it's going to go slow. And I'm like, man, we need to pump it out. Why not have every home service business in the country being ran by marketplace ministers? Like, why not that be the normal experience? I feel like our culture should dominate our cities as a way we work and the way that we witness in our lives. And so, real quickly, our mission at Brown's Pressure Washing is to fulfill the Great Commission by mobilizing marketplace leaders through disciple making in this thing called pressure washing. A lot of words, but man, our mission is to fulfill the Great Commission. Like, wouldn't that be all of our mission? And our goal is to create jobs, make disciples, serve the city. Our core values are hiring humble, honest, hardworking teams that show up to leadership development, set the standard on every job, and earn a five-star review. I just went over our entire mission, vision, values, and goals.
Yeah, that's fantastic, man. Joshua, thank you so much, man, for your time. So grateful for who you are, for what you're doing for the kingdom, and for so many different church planters around the country. And yeah, man, Lord willing, that'll be something that continues to grow and become a lot more popular. But just grateful for the calling of doing ministry in the marketplace and just getting away from that stigma that you have to be the quote unquote pastor to be able to do ministry where you live, work, and play, is really where it's at. So thanks, man. I appreciate your time this morning.
Yeah, I appreciate your time and God bless.
Thanks, bro.